Recording in progress.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Lower Providence Board of Supervisors' second budget workshop on Wednesday, October 27th. Would you all please rise and join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Greg, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Chairman McFarland.
Here.
Vice Chair Ekman.
Here.
Supervisor Sorgini.
Here.
Supervisor Coles.
Here.
And Supervisor Knights is not currently present but is on his way.
Okay, thank you. So this session is to further discuss the budget as a follow-up to our prior discussion on October 5th. There have been some updates and modifications, and so to bring us up to date, I'll ask Township Manager Schuster to give us the current status. Greg?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since our last budget workshop, I have sent out two revisions to the board. Just to summarize what those are, on October 22nd, we sent our first revision, which increased our revenue from the real estate transfer tax by $50,000 and increased our projection for earned income tax by $100,000. On the expenditure side, we increased the contracted services line for community development by $6,457. After receiving our health insurance, our insurance renewals, we decreased our health insurance by $224,656, decreased our workers' comp insurance by $18,253, and increased our general liability and property insurance by $1,690. All of those combined changes decreased the draft deficit in the proposed budget from $1,212,474 to $827,712. Furthermore, just yesterday on the 26th, we sent out another revised budget, increasing revenue in two areas. One was a $50,000 increase from anticipated permitting and inspection revenue. The other one was $250,000 of increase in earned income tax based on the latest projections from our tax collector Berkheimer. That would further reduce the draft general fund deficit from $827,712 to $527,712. Additionally, just to put some context on where we are in the current fiscal year, Sue was able to run some projections, and I remind everyone these are just projections. We still have a couple months left with the end of the year, but although the 2021 budget contemplated a deficit of almost $400,000, we're on track right now to have a surplus of about $234,000. Additionally, there is about $110,000 worth of expenses that most likely would be eligible for reimbursement through FEMA through the Presidential Disaster Declaration from IDA. So those are the latest numbers that we have right now as you begin your deliberations.
Okay, thank you. Does any of the supervisors have any opening comments they'd like to make with regard to this process?
I just have a question. So was it 250 of EIT total or 350 of earned income that was discovered?
Well, 350 from the original proposed budget, yes.
Okay, and that is actual, do we know if that is anything to do with people not working in the city or anything like that, or we don't really know where?
I don't really know. All I had was the one sheet of paper that Berkheimer sent to us. The initial increase of $100,000, that came from our internal projections. The additional $250,000 came when we get the Berkheimer notice. I don't know if the Sterling Act has anything to do with that, if people are, more working from home and not in the city, or if it's just people returning to work, as, we, get further along in the pandemic and people try to get back to normalcy. I'm sorry, I just don't have that information.
Okay.
The latest I heard on this Sterling Act from PSATs in Harrisburg last week is that there's been no adjustment to the Sterling tax at all. So there wouldn't be any impact from the Sterling tax issue in this number.
And then the inspection revenue, is that from the larger projects that are going on right now, like Arrowhead, and, or is that just home inspections?
Are you talking about this year or for 2022?
So the 50,000 for inspection that we also have,
That would be from Mike looking at the pipeline and making an assessment that we would get an additional $50,000 based on what he's seeing.
by the end of this year?
No, this is for
This
2022.
is for next year,
Next
based
year.
on pipeline of development?
Yes.
Okay. All right. What do we have in development next year?
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you. As you know, there's a bit of a delay between even the time that you all approve stuff and the time it gets to building permitting. And that's what these are. These are a couple of projects that I anticipate will be a little bit more revenue producing. One of them has to do with the biggest of the components is one that we thought was going to hit in 21 and actually is going to hit in 22.
is that Moscariello?
That's yes.
Okay, and then the county, would that also be factored in?
No, those are both. We both foresee those as hitting in 21.
Oh, this year, the new, okay,
In terms of permitting, yeah.
okay. All right, thank you.
Any other opening questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. I just want to maybe walk through this. I think we have, at least from my perspective, we have several significant discussion topics. One is a proposal or a request for funds from the fire department. There was also a discussion with regard to outsourcing mowing, which we left on the 5th and would like to revisit now. And then some discussion, although I think it's more informational than monetary, with regard to stormwater. So those are the ones that I'm aware of that that need some discussion, of course, with the addition of the deficit balance that must be made up. So those are the major topics in my view. There's a couple of questions I can just put out there, and I'm not sure who's the right one to answer them. Under 310 these are small numbers, but under 310-30 per capita taxes delinquent, we've disposed of the per capita tax, so I'm not sure why we have delinquent collections coming up in next year.
They're still going after people who haven't paid previous years. I just got one from this month where I thought we only asked them to collect like a few years, but they went back to 2006. I mean, they still collect them.
Oh, okay, so the balance that was being shown in the 2021 budget for that, which looks like it's about $8,079.76, is that the total amount owed by all parties for all years, or just?
No, that's just like an average of what we've been getting.
You have an estimate on what the total by all parties for all years is, if we collected all of it?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, thank you.
I can find that out for you.
It's not a big number, I'm just curious.
Okay.
Thanks. And then on 399, let me see if I wrote that down correctly. There was a, 399, the fund balance forward amount we had in on the 2021 budget of 397,377. And this appears that we did not access any of that, is that right?
So that is correct. As in the beginning, we talked about ending the year in a surplus.
Yes.
So if we do end the year in a surplus, there's no use of fund balance. So we would not need to utilize those funds.
I understand that, so I just wanted to point out that we did not actually use any fund balance for this current budget year at all.
Correct.
Correct? I just wanted to clarify.
So we didn't forward any, so in the Parks and Rec fund where we have fund balance forward, that didn't need to happen then? Or do we still have because there were several where we pay into the fund from the general fund. So how does the numbers that you talked about, how does that impact? I believe it was Parks and Rec and then the Capital Projects Fund?
So in Park and Rec, did we have any, were we using any fund balance there? Was that a
Yes,
balance?
yes.
But it was fund balance within the fund?
Yes.
So there was no transfer from the general fund to the park fund. So yes, we were using fund balance from the park fund.
Last year,
Well, this year too,
this
correct?
year, right? So is that account, so
That would be in the park fund, not in the general fund.
but did it, and so the balance that you gave, right, the surplus accounts for the money that was taken out of our surplus. I guess my question is, so the fund is balanced, but did we take from our 4 million the surplus that we have in in our fund? I'm using the wrong words, but,
So the surplus, everything that I've talked about has been in the general fund.
yes,
So the money that's in there right now, we did not use any of that. Let me rephrase. All the revenues we took in, or we believe will be taken in before the end of the year, are going to exceed our expenditures. So there's no need to dip into the general fund balance at all.
balance, that 4 million.
Correct.
So we're not depleting that 4 million, so what are we
We're
at
actually,
right now?
if those numbers that I read off at the beginning of the meeting hold true, we're actually adding to it.
So what would our new projection be then?
So,
Because the numbers I have show us going down to 3 million.
so with those numbers that I just read off today, just recently, our ending fund balance are you talking for this year or for next year?
Well, what is it for this year, and then what's our projected for
So
next year?
this year would be $4,749,000.
Okay,
And if you adopted the budget as is, with that 500 some odd $1,000 deficit, the fund balance at the end of '22 would decrease to $4,221,000. If, of course, everything in that budget came to fruition.
and that would be without the fire department request, without any other additional requests that we haven't considered yet, mowing and those things, correct?
Well, the mowing is built into the Park and Rec Fund. So that none of what you just said would impact that number, under the assumption that if you were to do something with the fire department through the fire fund, you would increase the millage of the fire fund. The only way it would impact the general fund is if you were to say, no, we're not going to increase the millage, we're going to make a transfer over from the general fund to the fire fund, which of course you can do, but if you're going to start a program, I would recommend that you have the millage to support it over time, because transferring every single year is just not going to work.
Okay,
Well, and to Kara's points, this goes back to our conversations in budgeting last year, where we recognized that certain accounts were underfunded in the way they were structured, and we talked about a plan over several years to mitigate tax increases and to smooth those and limit those by also utilizing the excess general or fund balance that we had. But now, we've identified at the end of, or near the end of '21, that we did not end up having to use that fund balance, so it begs the question how we're going to do that moving forward.
I think, I hope we're clear, what we're talking about is up to the moment, or up to this fiscal year, from the beginning of the last fiscal year, even though we had budgeted some use of the fund balance, we did not use it. And so therefore, the fund balance is higher now than it was in last year, at the end of last year. So the reconsideration of whether that gets used again going forward is still on the table. I'm just trying to clarify that the fund balance is now, as Greg pointed out, I think $4.7 million. That's just the only, right now, that's the only point I wanted to clarify. Okay, you mentioned that the mowing is built into the Public Works, the mowing outsourcing?
Park and Rec Fund.
Parks and Rec Fund, so, okay. So then, Is there any estimate for the incremental gain in labor hours, meaning if we pay the dollar amounts, which I would like to hear those, I can look them up, but what are we going to pay for outsourcing and what are we going to get back in labor hours as a result of transferring those labor hours to outside?
So the number of what we're going to pay is unknown at this point because we'd have to bid it out. The budget number I believe we're using is $100,000. That's based on what we've heard out in the marketplace. And I believe, Joe, you did an estimate of what the labor hours were costing us. Do you remember what that number was?
That was 275,000 if we used what we're paying our people now for what we did this past summer, is what the cost would be for our labor hours.
Okay, so thank you, Joe. So 275,000 is what you're estimating is the amount of cost of labor for mowing in this current year.
That's correct.
And then if we were to contract this out and use the $100,000 number for that, the 275 labor would still remain in place, right? It just wouldn't be used for mowing.
That's correct.
So there's
We would use it.
$100,000 of incremental cost involved with this transfer at this point.
Right.
And so can we just briefly touch on what those hours would be used for? How many hours is that? It's got to be hundreds.
Oh, yeah, I mean, going back to like we discussed at the last meeting, there's just a lot more maintenance items that we would be able to accomplish that, you know, quite frankly, we haven't gotten to this past year. And, you know, on the roads and the parks, we have 90 miles of road to maintain with a certain amount of people, 14 parks. And, you know, besides cutting the grass, we have the pavilions, the bathrooms, the swing sets, weeding the beds, you know, on, crack sealing of the roads, preparing for storms. You know, if they're going to come, we want to clean out the catch basins and things of that nature.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's basically one word, maintenance issues. Roads,
Correct.
parks, whatever.
Yeah, and I feel in the long run, by doing that, I think the township would be better off.
Fine. I just wanted to get a clarification on where the hours would move. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
And I had a question. So we have 3 public works people in Parks and Rec budget. What happens during the winter when things are slower with the parks? Do they do other projects with the larger Parks and Rec organization, or are they just dedicated to parks? I was curious why they were separated. I didn't realize they were in a complete, like in the
Well,
budget.
we were separated, I'd say this past year. Now we finally came back together, and they're all under me now. Before they were under the parks director, previous to Jane. So no, we all work together. You know, the big thing is now we're getting the trucks ready for winter. That's an important thing. We have to get into the basins and do a final cut or do some cleanup with them before winter. And yeah, we all work together, and there's plenty of work to do in the winter
Okay.
months. Yep.
Well, because there's a foreman with the 3, and I didn't know if structurally, if that was still the way, I guess, the way it should be structured, or if it makes a difference. I don't know what the history of having it in there would be.
It's fine, because like Jane will have some stuff, she'll get some stuff from residents or the Parks Board or something, wherever, and those guys will have to do those tasks. We have programs that are coming up, the tree lighting's gonna be coming up. That's a big event that we need to prepare for. Those guys are dedicated to that, plus, you know, Public Works guys help out, so.
Okay.
We work together, and it's all gonna change, I think, under me, and we're all one big happy family, that's all.
And I didn't know if structurally, from a budget perspective, it made sense where they sat or not.
The budget should really reflect where the efforts are going. At the end of the day, it doesn't really impact too much on what your organizational structure is. However, your point is correct. It's perhaps something we should look at going forward in the budget. And maybe it's a case of we put all the employees in the general fund under Public Works and say, general fund's gonna pick up 70% of their overall costs, and park and rec fund will pick up 30% of their overall costs, because they're all kind of doing all the activities. So we can certainly do that budgetarily. It's not gonna impact the overall bottom line, but it would probably be appropriate to do that.
Okay. And really, I was just looking from an HR person's perspective. When I looked at it, I was like, oh, and I don't think I caught that before, that they were separated but still kind of doing overlap work. And I didn't know if it made a difference anyway. It was more just a curiosity to understand. So thank you.
So Joe, is it your recommendation to do a full contract with all the properties in the township mode, or sort of a hybrid model where you might do, once a month mowing with your guys and contract out the rest? How do you feel?
I would like to see that all is subbed out and done that way. I think that'd be best. Like I said, there's plenty of work to do, and that's what we've done the last how many years prior, and it's worked out good, for our maintenance program and all the other different jobs that we have to do. So I'd like to go back to that.
And so that last contract, when we put it out to bid, right, when we changed directions last summer, it was, the bids were coming in around 100,000?
Sure.
So, in 2020, when we did the bids, we had 3 people bid on them. If you do it and break it down, we did it on a 4-year. If we break it down, the average is about 76,940 that came in. That was the middleman, out of the 3 bids. So.
Okay.
I think it was 54 budgeted before that, right?
When we did it, yes,
Yeah.
with Green Ridge, it was 54,689.
Yeah, we had that for several years at that lower cost, yeah, that's where the surprise came in, yeah, okay.
I'm going to put Greg on the spot. Thoughts, opinions, guidance on thoughts after looking at the budget and whatnot?
On anything in
On
specific or in
Or on
general?
outsourcing the mowing?
I'm
Do you
sorry,
have a
on the
recommendation?
outsourcing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do support this. I think, I understand why the decision was made when the bids came in high. However, what we are doing is we are putting some highly trained and skilled employees making nearly $40 an hour, having them mow all week long. That, from an allocation of resources perspective, doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
I don't think that was the intent initially. Unfortunately, it was sold to us completely different. Because I would not have agreed to that
I don't know what
either.
happened. All I can say is when I
Yeah.
looked at this,
Yeah.
I think there are things that make sense to outsource and things that don't from a municipal standpoint. This one makes a lot of sense to outsource. The biggest concern to me, besides, notwithstanding the cost, is the opportunity cost and what our guys are not able to do. We need them out there repairing the roads, managing the stormwater system, and all the other activities that they're just not able to get to. It doesn't take much for the crew to be a little bit short, as we are right now. We have a couple vacancies that are in there right now. So when one person is unavailable, you're seeing basically a 10% reduction, in work power. So yeah, I do support this. I think it just makes more sense long term. I recognize that there is an additional cost in returning to the model that you had previously, but I think it's definitely the more efficient way of doing things.
All right, I appreciate that.
I apologize for coming in late. I had a late work meeting. Do you mind giving me just a real quick recap of the high-level numbers that you discussed before I got here?
Absolutely. Let me grab my paper again. So Just very quickly, and I won't break it down as I did at the beginning of the meeting. So I sent out an email on the 22nd, basically with the increase in revenues and a overall decrease in expenditures, brought the deficit from about 1.2 million down to 827,000. I sent out another email yesterday, increasing revenue in two areas for a total of a $300,000 increase that further reduced the deficit from 827,000 down to 527,000. Additionally, I reported out that Sue was able to run some numbers today and came up with some projections on where we'll finish the year, which would be a $234,000 surplus. I don't believe that's in that spreadsheet, though, that I sent you right there. Additionally, in addition to that $234,000 surplus, we believe that there's another $110,000 out there of expenditures that are potentially reimbursable through the IDA Presidential Disaster Declaration.
This is all a little confusing to me then, because the numbers I'm hearing right now are different than what we'd had before. So on the revenue then, the revenue increase of about $300,000, what was that made up of?
That was $50,000 increase in anticipated permitting and inspection revenues, and Mike had already, before he got here, talked about that a little bit on what he's seeing in the pipeline and where projects are. The bigger one, though, of $250,000 was earned income tax. When I sent out the email yesterday, I also included the notice from Berkheimer, who had given us that notification of their estimate. So we upped our estimate in line with what Berkheimer said.
So I'm looking then on the earned income tax, the 2021 actual, and these are documents that came out this week, currently is about 4.849 million, and we're projecting end of year 5.75.
So that was a projection that was done.
There's the newest budget, right?
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think you got this yesterday in an email.
correct. I'm looking at the same one. So, so then we're still projecting the 5.75.
No, we've changed that. Do we have what was Berkheimer's
It's
projection?
right on that budget, but that's the one we just showed up. It's 6.075, which is also,
No, it says 5.75 here. Oh, okay.
Yep.
So this one that we have here is different than the one that I just printed out.
That was the
Okay.
one that was sent out yesterday.
Okay. So this one I must have gotten like the day
Well,
before.
that could have been the first one I sent
Yeah.
out on the 22nd.
Okay.
So the next one was on the 26th.
So now we have a 6.075. And now how does that trend, do you feel comfortable with the trend that we're going to hit that?
Yeah, I feel
6.075?
comfortable. I was actually a little surprised when Berkheimer gave us those numbers. Having dealt with them for many years as well as Sue, they are incredibly conservative.
Yep.
So when they came in with those numbers, and if they're saying it, I'm fairly comfortable with it as well. Yeah, the last thing I want to do is overshoot the estimates on revenue, because that just bites you in the end.
Yep. And so the 4.854 or the $4.849 million, which are the two numbers that are to date here, is that as of the beginning of October?
it's pretty much as of the
As
the
of that
date
report?
of the report.
Okay, so if I go ahead and do a straight line projection, that takes the projection, if I forecast it out, it takes it to 5.8 million, not the 6.075. Are we
So,
expecting like bonuses or something?
so I think the big thing with earned income tax is it's not linear.
Okay.
It is traditionally, and correct me if I'm wrong, basically quarterly. So doing a straight line, depending on when you do it, could be accurate. But
Okay.
it's usually not 100% accurate when you do a straight line.
So I should base that on a quarterly. Okay, thank you.
Okay, another question I had, just going through the thing with the line item 438, we had a stormwater repair amount this year of $96,111.26. That was not budgeted, I just wanted to confirm that. Under the general fund, 438, storm damage repairs, it's on page 15, top line.
You want to get that?
You know what, yeah, go ahead.
these are all the repairs that were from the Ida storm, and these are all going to be reimbursed, but not reimbursed, but hopefully reimbursed, or we'll be sending them with the grant for FEMA.
I understand, yeah, I'm not worrying, I'm just pointing or making sure I understand that we have $96,000 of unbudgeted expense in our total expense line right now because of this cost.
Yes, and we actually had a couple more bills that I kind of projected it to be 110, so it's a little bit more than that.
Yes, and we will get to the American Rescue Plan, the recovery of those funds. I'm aware of that, that's fine. I just wanted to clarify that the actual budget expenditures totals have $96,000 in them that were not budgeted.
But actually 110, yes.
110,000 that was
Yes.
not budgeted. Okay, so, I mean, if we looked at the expenditures line right now, it's actually, because we expect to recover that, it's actually $110,000 overstated against the actual operation, if you exclude this line.
That's correct. The only caveat I would put in there is just comparing fiscal year to fiscal year, I would not anticipate getting those funds in this fiscal year.
Right. No, I understand
But-
that. I'm not trying to adjust it. I just wanted to clarify that it's there. If you were looking at it as a budget number that had to be carried forward, this would not necessarily carry forward with all the others.
Oh, correct. No, there's no reason to carry this forward.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that point.
So your surplus number is $96,000 light, or 110?
No, the surplus number that was given of $234,000, that includes, that's not light. What I also said in there is that if we did get a reimbursement of that $110,000, then the surplus would jump to $334,000.
Right, I didn't mean light that it didn't include that, is what I meant. So it would go up by another potentially $110,000.
If we receive that reimbursement, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you. So Sue, then, or Greg, we know that there is American Rescue money, in escrow right now that can be used for something we can't identify fully, but it's going to get assigned somewhere, somehow. And I'm just wondering whether or not, in addition to the $96,000 or $110,000 of storm repairs that are in this current budget, is there any other money that could be recovered under that American Rescue
So
that's in this expense line now?
just to clarify, the $110,000 doesn't have anything to do with the American Rescue Plan. That is from the federal disaster declaration. That's where we're going to get that money from. There is nothing in this budget which contemplates spending any of the American Rescue Plan Act funds.
Okay, I misspoke. So the other fund, the disaster relief fund, would be where you would recover the 110.
Yeah, from the disaster, yes.
So my only question then is, under that same disaster fund, is there any other line item in this budget
Oh,
of
no,
expense
there's nothing else in there. It's all
that could be
in one line.
recovered? Labor, anything else?
Yeah, well, yes, there's we have been tracking labor, so yes, there are other funds that can, or there are other expenditures that can be recovered, yes.
Potentially recovered. Yeah, I'm not trying to identify those. I just wanted to identify a category, because Public Works, along with police and EMS, well, at least along with police, they put in substantial hours for that recovery.
Are those in that number, or is that just from the contract repairs?
Those are just the contract.
Okay, so yes, there are other
Okay.
expenses that could be subject to reimbursement.
Joe and I are actually going to be working on some of what the Public Works
Yeah.
did in preparation for the storm and what hours were spent on there. A lot of what we did for mutual aid for Upper Providence, they requested that I send them a bill for that, and they have paid us for it. $7,600. So we got reimbursed for a lot of our overtime.
Which is great, and I appreciate their cooperation and the Public Works being available to them. I'm just trying to kind of bookmark or tab that this could be adjusted later after the disaster money comes in and we've applied for all of the expenses we could recover. Some of those are in here and are stated presently as expenses. That's all I'm trying. I'm not trying to arrive at a number. I don't.
Where do you see it for police? I only saw Ida tagged under expenses for like Public Works and whatnot. Was it tagged under the line item for the police force in here? Because I didn't see it.
I don't believe there's any tag in the
I
budget.
mean, it was
What we
just,
do is we have kept track of all the expenditures and all the hours spent.
and it's accounted for in here?
Well, of course, when we pay out payroll, it's accounted for in the,
Okay, because you have some things identified as IDA specifically, and so,
but I think the only
I'm
line
confused
item
then.
is that $110,000, and that's specifically for the repairs that were done,
Yeah.
mostly through our contractor. Anything else, such as payroll, which is the bulk of what we're talking about, is in here just in their normal line items. However, we've been going through the process and we've identified them throughout the storm of how many hours, and we can go ahead and submit those for reimbursement.
and so overtime costs in this budget might include overtime for IDA.
I'd go beyond might, I would say, definitely, yes.
Absolutely does.
All
yeah.
right, but it's not itemized for
Yeah,
us to be
yeah,
able to see.
it's not itemized within the budget that way.
Okay, and it's still projected within budget based on what I was looking at. Okay,
When do you think you'll have an idea of what those total costs, you know, in,
I'd have to, we'd have to circle back, but it shouldn't be too hard to get that number for you. I just don't know it off the top of my head.
okay, thank you.
So, and I know that's a process and that'll take some time. I'm not trying to get to that number now, but I just did want to bookmark that item and also just get your confirmation that when you projected 2022 labor, that you excluded what might have been the amounts that were singular labor expended for the Ida and other disasters that may not be normal hours.
That's correct. We budget for normal operations.
Thank you.
and then in terms of because a lot of the money that we've found, right, additional revenue, other than earned income, if I'm correct, are kind of one-time revenue, or not revenue that we might consistently, depending on what's happening, like inspection fees,
Yeah,
that over time.
it depends on your definition of one time, because theoretically, all building permit income is one time, because the project happens and then you get paid and it's done. The question really is, what is a average level that you're going to receive year over year versus the spikes you're going to see from larger developments? So I would say, and I would defer to Mike, for any more clarification, but it's a mixture of what the average is plus what additional spikes may be in there.
Yeah, and because we're nearing build out over time, that may go down. It's,
Yeah,
we have a,
I would suspect that, as time progresses in Lower Providence, you will see less and less of those spikes.
okay.
Or,
And then,
or the spikes will be lower magnitude.
okay. And then the other thing is, when you presented the 2022 budget, and I went back and looked at 2020, 2019, and 2018, just to kind of see, and the trend on all of those budget presentations has been that we're breaking even so far. So I wanted to know, is there anything in what you presented to us that you would reassess or give us a different presentation based on the adjusted numbers that you gave us?
No, I don't think I would change anything. Everything that we've talked about here is good. I mean, it's good that the additional revenue is coming in from earned income tax in other areas. It's good that we're forecasting out a surplus from this year. It doesn't change the fact that a deficit is still budgeted. And the longer you go on, budgeting a deficit, eventually that deficit is going to be realized and it's going to get you. So I wouldn't change anything. I would still say that the prudent financial thing to do is to not have a deficit in your budget. However, you are in a strong financial position right now. You do have options. And so if you were going to utilize fund balance and not do anything with the mill rate this year, I certainly could understand that. But I would strongly suggest, as I said in the presentation, I think this was the biggest thing, is a financial plan is really needed to deal with this situation over the next few years. The problems that we're talking about are solvable. They're not huge problems that are incredibly complex. It just needs a plan to go ahead and take you where you want to go.
And I guess that's after looking year over year over year, it seems like it's a very similar story, and I would agree, kind of that planning for it. And I just was curious if the assessment changes based on this data. because we're still relatively flat with revenue, but we're increasing salaries 3 to 4% every year. So unless all of our working age people get 3 to 4% increases every year, and we sell more houses at 3 to 4% every year, we're probably going to trend like we've been trending for the past 10 years, kind of neck and neck.
Eventually, the deficits will be realized and expenditures will overtake revenues. You know, and every single year is different. You know, as we saw this year, we're very pleasantly surprised. We're going to come in with a surplus. That's great, but can't guarantee that next year or any other year. The only thing I can say is continual budgeting of deficits is not something that I would recommend financially.
And even with and then in terms of the 500 or so that we're paying out in capital, like for loans and stuff, even that's not going to save us per se. Like getting that back isn't going to fix kind of structurally, because we will eventually have to do capital projects of some sort.
Correct. Well, there's capital projects and there's capital projects that need to be financed, which is what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. So yes, the debt service is scheduled to be retired over the next couple years, and that's going to give you a great opportunity to do one of two things: either repurpose that millage over to the general fund, in which you can either delay or offset mill rate increases there, or the opportunity to do some larger capital projects, which is why I was stressing earlier the financial planning aspect. So you have, Lower Providence has a lot of tools to deal with these issues. It just needs a solid plan.
And so I think that's a good tipping point to talk about the debt service and what's going to happen next year. So there's two big bonds that'll be, their last payment will happen in 2022. So we'll free up $200,000 in the debt service roughly for
In 2023, yes.
For 2023's
Yes.
budget, right.
Yes.
So we're coming into, we're almost halfway there here
Yes.
with it gone. So it makes sense in the upcoming year that we start to have the discussion of what do we do? Are we going to explore capital building investments? And like you said, do you fund them through a new, dedicated tax revenue millage and move this millage to something else? Or do you just pick it up right here and kind of keep the debt service set as it is? I know Don Delamater did a few years ago sort of some projections as to where we will be. And so I think COVID gave us a little bit of a, made us off track, because there were a couple things we wanted to explore. We wanted to look at the solar projects. That would have happened last year in the planning stages, and then looking at what do we do with this facility and possibly a new police station. So we have a lot of work to do before we start to come up with that plan. But it seems to me to include, of course, the fire company's needs in that discussion because these are big ticket items that if we balance our finances properly, I don't think it'll be a big hit to our property owners, but that all remains to be seen.
Yeah, I would tend to agree that we need to do more planning for these things. We have the firehouse, we've talked about the police department. We're going to have ongoing issues related to stormwater that we're going to have to remediate. So I agree we want to have a plan for those things and figure out what we want to do over a period of time, 2, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and then drive our financial plan to support that. I do have a question, and again, this is probably because of me coming in late, but when I look at page 5 on the budget it's a revenue question, I'm showing that the 2021 budget is $11,096,000, and 2021 actual is $10,858,000. Then the projected year end is $12.89 million on this number, which is a little bit different than the total revenues that that I have in my spreadsheet here. So I'm trying to figure out how do I relate the $12.89 million revenue to the other things I'm looking at.
I'm not sure I understand. So the 12.89, that's projected
Right, for the end of this
at the
year.
end of this year, yes.
Yep.
Greg, I think it's the same question I asked you this morning, because if you back up, you'll see the American Rescue Plan funds are listed in the projected year end for 2021, 1.4 million. I think that's what skews that number that you're finding, Gary. Correct me if I'm wrong, Greg.
Oh, sorry, the $1.4 million, yeah, is that in that? Yes.
Yep.
So Fred, good point. So the $1.4 million of American Rescue Plan funds were taken in, they were recognized as revenue. However, we are not counting it towards fund balance because fund balance is unreserved, unrestricted. So we can't count it as part of the fund balance.
So I would want to remove the 1.
Just take 1.4 million off that number and it
off the
should get you where
12.
you want to go.
So that gets me down to 11,490.
484, 589.
484. And then how does that relate? And so we're saying that our projected year-end revenues are 11,484.
Once you back out the
Once you back
the
that
ARPA
that
funds,
out.
yeah.
Okay. That's a little bit different number than what I have here. Thank you for that.
All right, so I think from everyone's comments, we can all agree that going forward and early into the next year, we are going to need to set up a series of meetings and discussions on financial planning, the deficit restructuring in terms of are we going to borrow and for what and to do which items. We also have the American Rescue Plan, which is as yet unassigned and unidentified and clear enough that we can spend any of it. So there's a great deal to be discussed as a longer-term prospect, which we need to do, but it isn't something we're going to be able to do tonight. So I'd like to bring the focus back onto this budget. And Greg, you had earlier on mentioned that the deficit is now 527,712, right?
Correct.
Can you just give us the big hunks there of where that deficit lies from year over year? No, I don't need it down to the dollar, just what are the top 2 or 3 things that are causing the deficit between 21 and 22?
So it was in my presentation and, I'm looking it up 1 second.
Jason was trying to get your attention.
Yeah, I have it in there.
Oh, sorry, Jason, looking the wrong way.
I think it's toward the end here.
While he's looking for that, does anybody, I got a little tripped up with my numbers here. Does anyone know what the projected deficit or surplus for this year is going to be?
I think you said the surplus was 234, but and then the deficit's the 527.
Okay.
This year's surplus is 234,
Well, 234 without the
It's
FEMA.
the 110.
plus
right.
the 110 that we brought up earlier.
So,
The following year's deficit, the one that we're planning for tonight,
Yep.
is 527,712. And my question was, now, I know you made this presentation earlier, but that was when the number was much larger.
yes.
So
So
just
some
give
of
me
those
the
numbers are still the same. So the pension contribution has gone up about $164,000. So that's one big chunk. The health insurance number I gave you, just take that out because our health insurance was basically flat. Transfer to capital has gone up $211,000. That's still the same. If you recall, you had the fund, the unrestricted capital fund, the unrestricted capital fund, which had been transferring over quite a bit of funds over the last number of years, in lieu of transferring from the general fund. That fund has become depleted, so it requires more transfers over from the general fund. And then salary increases of about $149,000. So if you add those up, it comes pretty darn close to what that deficit number is.
Okay, thank you. So coming back to that point, the capital transfer, which I know we put in place, is there any um, flexibility that we could consider that capital transfer coming out of the fund balance and being used to transfer from the general fund into capital from that perspective.
Well, just in general, it's kind of a same pants, different pocket kind of approach. Because when you're going to run a deficit anyways, say you run a $500,000 deficit, that deficit's, could be, you could say it's going over to the capital fund, or you can say it's going over for, general fund expenditures. It really doesn't matter.
Well, okay, it doesn't matter unless you look at the dollars and say we're gonna tax the residents $211,000 this year or next year for this transfer. Well, at the same time, we're sitting on $4.7 million of theirs that we collected previously.
You can do it if you want to make a decision to continually fund capital expenditures from the general fund surplus. You certainly could do it. However, the only thing I would say is what happened to your general fund is what happened to the unrestricted capital fund over time. You'll just deplete it.
Well, and that goes back to our conversations from last year that we didn't want to do that and continue to go with a budget that is really deficit spending, but at the same time, we didn't want to impose a massive tax increase on our residents. So looking to acknowledge that we have a give or take $5 million fund balance and looking to smooth out utilizing some of that with the need to properly fund the general fund and the other funds that we have. So, notwithstanding the long-term planning that needs to happen, we're looking at $528,000 in deficit that we have to make up for. And I don't hear anybody advocating for cutting anything. Is that accurate?
We don't have anything to cut, do we? We got things coming.
From any of the proposals, or so
Yeah.
we have to come up with it.
One of the concerns I have on that, Jason, cutting is, I see that we have a lean workforce.
Absolutely. I'm not advocating for cutting anything, but I'm just
Yeah,
identifying that 528 that's a number we have to function with,
right,
at least
Yep.
528.
yep.
And it accounts for none of the coming issues. I mean, we've got to figure out how to fund fire. We haven't even talked about EMS. And my understanding is they also are in a very similar predicament as fire is. And ultimately, it is our responsibility as a board. How are we going to fund the community center? How are we going to fund stormwater? There are big problems. How are we going to ensure that we're properly staffed with the right people so that we're not killing the staff we have, because we run so lean. And I think they do a bang-up job for the few people they have, but it's not fair to them to continue to wear them ragged, and it's not fair to the residents because it will eventually impact service. So I do think it's irresponsible to not address the issues. We didn't address it last year fully. I wasn't on the board prior to that, but looking at the history, it's not been addressed. And so we're kind of playing a shell game, moving money from one place to the next, but the structural problem appears to still be there, and I'd like to see us at least tackle that and kind of account for the future rather than putting it off another year.
Greg, what's your recommendation of a healthy, surplus that we have? We're carrying that, pretty large amount.
So there are varying opinions on that. If you talk to, those in the bond market, they would like to see 25% of your operating fund. If you're really not interested in financing, you don't have that opportunity, in general, you'd like to see in the 10 to 15% range, or ideally, if nothing else, at least 3 months of operations worth. It is quite clear that the surplus that you have built up in the fund balance far exceeds your needs in any way you'll look at it. So I would say that the answer that hinges on what do you want to do in the future in terms of any potential financing. Because if you want to go ahead and do a larger project, I would say, yeah, you want to stay around, that 20%, 15 to 20% mark. I bet there's other financial professionals that can give you much better advice on that than I could. But if financing is not something you're interested in, if you just want to make sure you have enough money to handle ongoing operations and any emergency, then, somewhere around the 15% mark, I think would be more appropriate.
We got to where we are, though, because years and years ago, we had, the township was in a position where its fund balance had dropped so low that its bond rating was lowered by Moody's. So recognizing that, the intent was to right the fiscal ship here. So I think we've done that and then some. But now, moving forward, looking to plan. So, I understand what Kara is saying about looking at the structure. Part of the emphasis, though, over years was to ensure that we build up that fund balance because it had been grossly depleted over the years. So
And
maybe
now
we,
if we do nothing, it will continue to
right,
go down.
and we don't want to
So
go in that direction either.
is that the healthy way is that the responsible way to do it when we know we've got fire, we've got, salary increases and all that that's
Well,
coming?
I was gonna, in relation to that, I was gonna ask, does our 2022 budget address the requirements that the fire department gave us?
No, those are not included.
Okay, thank you.
So, look, it's a good point. Let's talk about that for a minute. So I think we all recognize that we have a problem, and we've been talking about it for a couple of years. The reality is that second-class township code, and we all know that, puts the onus on us to provide fire services. And we all just went and celebrated the 75th, really 76th anniversary of the fire department. And for the lion's share of those years, our two organizations have functioned independently. And I don't think that can happen anymore. So we recognize that across the Commonwealth, and we've heard this and we've seen the presentations by the fire department when they come in, that volunteerism across the Commonwealth has plummeted, commensurate with the requirements or increasing requirements to become a firefighter and to fight fires. So in order for us to compete with the surrounding municipalities that have compensation programs, it's something we need to consider. And in as much, and we have the figures in front of us that the fire department has provided us with, in as much as I support this, there are a couple caveats that I think we need to look at in doing this. So to all of the conversations about advanced planning, there's a number out there of $186,400 for an increase this year, but it's important to recognize that's only for a night and weekend come from home staffing budget. It's not the night and weekend in-station staffing budget that they're asking for the following year, to a tune of another almost $300,000. And worse yet, it doesn't do anything to solve the daytime, weekday issues associated with this. So I think part of our long-term planning has to be looking at that. I don't know that that's something that any municipality can really can handle on their own, given the extreme costs associated with that. At the same time, I don't think it's something that we can continue to not address. So I certainly support putting that in this year, with the knowledge that we're going to have to really talk about what that looks like for years forward, because that would be another $300,000, another X number of dollars to address the daytime. And then with that, I think the biggest mistake over the years is that the two organizations have functioned independently, and that might have worked in the 1950s and 1980s, but it surely doesn't work today. So there are no entities in the township that we fund and fund to this extreme that we don't have some sort of oversight over. So in addition to providing the funding, I would recommend that we work towards some sort of real solidified partnership. I know we've had some conversations about an actual contract by which the fire department contracts with us to provide fire service. And it's just a system of assurances that when the township is funding any one entity to this large of an amount and an increased amount moving forward, that we can't continue to exist as mutually exclusive entities anymore. We have to figure out how to create this marriage, this partnership, and move that forward working together. So I support it, but with some sort of system of assurances moving forward.
Do you want to go ahead, Kara?
I think the only thing I'd add to that, thank you, because I agree, is that also recognizing that we're going to get much more efficiency if we also push to have some sort of regional agreements with neighboring fire departments. And so Upper Providence is doing some building, they're gonna have some capacity. And so it makes sense, and we're gonna get much more bang for our buck for all of us if we can also address that it will eventually have to be a regional type of approach to it. And I believe in my conversations with the fire chief that he recognizes that as well. I don't know if most people know that we currently have our staff on call to answer fire department calls. And so that takes away again from roads being fixed and things being done. So we're already kind of paying for it anyway, just not directly. And so, you know, it just makes sense to kind of address it.
And in my discussion with our fire chief and other fire chiefs, I agree on like the regionalization and the need to, you know, cooperate. You know, our fire department buys one piece of equipment, another fire department buys another piece, and that way you're not, you know, you're spreading the load, so to speak, in terms of the types of equipment, and that becomes more efficient because you can, you know, take it to the different fires that come up. Along with the strategic planning and some of the things that Jason and Kara said, you know, as we, over time, it's going to become more regionalized. There might be some level of consolidation, and I've said this repeatedly for a number of years. I want to make sure that that Lower Providence has one of those fire departments and equipment, building, all of those things. You know, maybe it's a combined police fire department building. You know, I don't know, but you know that we have a facility that is top of the line and is going to have us be one of those regional hubs if it ever comes to that, because I want that close to my house, because that's going to increase my property values, and it's going to, you know, allow, if a fire occurs, for it to be served more quickly. And I think we want to do that strategically, also looking at like fire substations, you know, where, you know, what's the right positioning. It might be perfect right now, maybe it has to be adjusted, I don't know, but I just think we want to plan that out and, you know, look at that holistically in terms of the broader trends in the state.
I'd be very careful with that conversation, that regionalized conversation. It's a very sensitive subject. It's not what we're pursuing here. We're looking to make sure that they're funded properly at this time. They're already doing, you know, coordinating with response times, and that seems to be working well. Everybody understands what's important, and so all the local departments are working together. We're not looking to consolidate. Please make sure that's clear.
No, that's a very fair ball, Colleen. Probably more thinking not aspirationally, but what might happen or what might be thrust upon us. But that's very fair ball.
Right, so I think we all know that, you know, there's a lot of discussion amongst the volunteer fire companies about regionalizing, but it's not going to happen this year or next, and it's going to happen as it's beginning to organically with groups of towns rather than coming down from any kind of state leadership on that. That's already underway. But I think the question we want to look at tonight, and I come back to one of Jason's point, is do we want to approve the $186,400 requested? And for the public's benefit, since I don't have this sheet, that is essentially an additional amount over and above what we're already providing in order to provide some, we'll call it stipend payment for volunteers to spend time in the fire station so that when a fire call comes in, there are people in the station ready to go out. And their plan to do that starts with nights and weekends, not during the day. So that's step one. They do have additional steps that they are indicating in future years at additional costs. So this additional funding is to provide some compensation, not payroll, to volunteers who are willing to spend that time or be committed to, if they're not in the station, be committed to responding to a call at any given time, so that there is a certainty that trucks will be filled with the necessary firefighters and will be able to respond in a very timely manner. So that's their undercurrent behind why they would like this additional money. We know that competitively in other towns, we are losing some of our own volunteer firefighters to other towns in the evenings. They are paying stipends of $100 for people that are qualified volunteer firefighters to sleep in their station. And if you're young and single, getting $100 and answering the call if they have one is attractive. What can happen and does happen, including here, is that some of our better qualified firefighters, meaning younger guys, single guys that are fully trained, that have a lot of flexibility, better being that they are more available, they are not available to us on certain nights because they are getting paid to sleep in somebody else's fire station. So I think it's very important that we understand the basis for this need. It's a competitive market now, and our volunteer fire company needs some financial support to remain viable in that competitive market. So that's, I think, a reasonable explanation of why they want the additional $186,400. To Jason's earlier point, I think some oversight as this number begins to grow, and it is growing if we approve this, and will be continuing to grow in future years, we're going to need some improved oversight, and we're going to need to maybe not go from no oversight to anything rather dramatic, but begin by having monthly reports, perhaps have the fire company come in here at least once a quarter and present to us and the public the status, get some analysis of the number of calls that are being made, the major ones, routine ones, how much labor they're paying out, and what the impact has been for this program as it goes along. And that would just be an initial step as we begin to move closer to a closer oversight position, or I won't say oversight, we'll use partnership position that helps us help the fire department in the appropriate way. So there's a lot of problems that they're dealing with. As we all know, they're all volunteers, and we're forever grateful for that effort. And so I think what we want to do here, if they've given us what I believe is a reasonable presentation on what they need the additional money for, do we want to consider, we're not voting on this, but I'm just asking, do we want to consider adding this to the $527,000 deficit to be recognized as we begin to look for revenue opportunities? Is everyone agreeable to that?
I do, and just to reiterate my earlier points and clear a little bit of it up too, I don't want anyone in the fire department to think that we are stepping in and we'd like to run the fire department. Nothing could be further from the truth. But this may sound trite or even bizarre, but the reality is we don't have any formalized partnership. The building might be, a half a mile down the road from here, but there's nothing actually linking Lower Providence to the township, to the fire department, other than the funding stream. So to that end, we've had some initial conversations about a potentially formalized contract, something that would begin to cement the partnership between the two, not create control of the fire department by the township. So I don't want anyone in the fire department to think that suddenly you're going to have supervisors who are now the fire chiefs. Nothing could be further from the truth, but just something to solidify that partnership as we begin to increase that funding.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, when I think about the costs that they're asking for, compare those costs to what a professional fire department would be. Like, it's very cheap. It's a really good deal. What I would like to see, though, I don't want to see the deficits continuing to increase, put that on the backs of our kids. We're doing that at the federal level. I don't want to do that here. I would propose that we address that in the Emergency Services Fund millage. I would go a step farther, and Chief, I don't know exactly what your difference is between last year and this year, but I would lean towards putting something like that, those increases in fire and police, into the Emergency Services Fund, so that we're continuing to fund those services, as we're looking at current deficits and growing bigger.
So you're saying transfer police from the general fund to the emergency services fund so that all emergency services are in one place?
Well, you could do it that way. We could move everything from the police into the Emergency Services Fund and address that, or minimally just do the increases in police and fire into the Emergency Services Fund. But actually having the entire police, having all of the police fire and EMS and the Emergency Services Fund kind of makes sense. You know, it's what it's there for.
And if we did this, we still would have, in terms of fire, going back to that discussion, because my biggest concern is kind of long-range planning, right? So again, we're kind of piecemealing year to year when we know that over 5 years, the costs are going to increase. So I guess I'd be looking for guidance because I'm not a finance person. Is this the best approach? Do you just kind of every year increase the millage to address each increase, or is it better to increase it a little bit higher to be able to accommodate unexpected increases or the next increase that's coming in the next year? And I don't know if you have an assessment, Greg, on that. I hate to put you on the spot, but I mean, it's just, you know, from a money perspective, does one make more sense than the other? I don't want to hit residents with a big bill, but
I think in general, where municipalities get themselves in trouble is when they go years and years and years without adjusting the mill rate, and then a big adjustment occurs. So I think the better thing to do, both financially and for the taxpayer, is to have incremental, smaller incremental changes over time. You know, in this particular case, you know, the fire department has laid out a plan going out for 5 years. You know, could there be increases needed over time? Perhaps. They are going to be in competition with other fire companies who are also trying to, you know, quote unquote, employ those same people. And they're going to, you know, there's going to be increases in wages, I'm sure. It's hard to say in this specific case because we're just starting this out and we don't know which way it's going to go. If you did want to take the millage approach, and as far as including the police department, the emergency services fund, I've never seen that before. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'd want to consult the second-class township code to make sure that that's allowable. But we just did some quick calculations. If you just wanted to up the emergency services fund by $186,000 to cover the first year of the program, that would equate to approximately 0.12 mils.
And to that point, I think that's the prudent approach. I recognize the value in what you're saying, Kara, but the problem is they're just not ready. So the in-station program can't happen now because they'd have to sleep in sleeping bags in the hall. The building isn't set up for overnight accommodations the way it would need to be. And we don't have a well-developed program yet for the day. So as much as there's a part of me that likes that approach and recognizes that we need that bigger plan, I think for this year, the smaller approach, the funding the Come From Home program with the idea that we have to spend the next year as we're looking at long-term planning, incorporating this as part of it, then I think that's our best bet.
because last year we kind of had the same thing, right? Don had recommended, given us different mill increases, and I think we ultimately settled on using some of the debt that had come free, and then doing a small increase in mills with the intent, and something that I pushed for again is we need a plan long-term. And so at that point, it wasn't in writing, it wasn't firm, that, you know, each year we would consider another small increase. And I'm not sure how that, if we did the same increase we did last year, what that would do for the budget and the deficit and everything. I think the biggest thing is just being transparent, right? As much as we can in documents moving forward, if that is the approach that we tell the residents that we are addressing a long-range plan and that you will see small increases rather than us hitting you all at once if that's what we decide to do, so that it's not a surprise if we have to.
And that's the issue, that millage increase, that was just the emergency fund, so emergency services fund, so you're talking the 186 and change.
Yeah.
That's not the 527, so we still have to address that.
Exactly. So that's the thing is, I mean, we've got to address the issues we have, and we've got to at least be honest that it doesn't fix it long-term, that there will likely be additional things that have to be done unless, you know, we get 1,000 new people in town that have earned income, which isn't going to happen anytime soon. So it's
Approximately, are you done? No, yeah, go Approximately, what's the change in cost for police from 2021 to 2022? Just for my benefit. Kind of all in labor. Vehicles, new weapons, non-lethal stuff.
Chief, do you know what it is without us looking? No.
To do the same thing everybody else is doing, you check the book.
I counted about 62 in salary. I didn't see the other, actually, about 100 in salary.
So the operational budget is going from about 4.1 to 4.2 million dollars. That's $100,000 right there. That does not include any of the capital that is in the budget.
Roughly how much capital is in the budget?
I don't have that.
I don't have it separated.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I would call that necessarily an increase. It might be an increase because there's just different things every single year. We'll see if we can.
Yeah, it looked like it kind of, you always had, there's kind of been a consistent amount of money over
We
time.
certainly try to be consistent with the cruisers because those you want to have a good replacement program in, but there were a few new things this year, and there's always that, was it the tasers that are on the 5-year program? So that's a recurring cost, but Sue's looking, we'll see if we can get you the capital numbers for the police compared to last year.
So I'm looking approximately 300K between the fire and the police, roughly, is that increase. You'd have to add the 186 onto the 527.
And about 70,000 for pension as well.
Yep.
And the capital should be a separate discussion anyway. It's not in this budget.
214,000? Okay. So between the new fire expenditures and the new police expenditures, we're looking at about 400,000.
It sounds approximately correct. They just,
Yep.
depends on what you call new expenditures, 'cause
Sure.
some of that is
Yep. Yep.
same things, just year over year that they're getting, but yes.
Yep.
If you're going to look
Really
at capital
increase.
at all, it should be the net difference between what you were spending this year and what you're spending next year, not the amount you're going to spend next year,
The capital increase, yep.
which I don't think is the number you got.
Okay, so do we have the capital number for 21 for police? Okay, we don't have that, but we can get it
Okay,
for
but
you.
that's not really part of this discussion anyway, because it's capital, not operating.
I think really for me, it's just accounting for, making sure that we're accounting for the natural increases that are in the CBA. It's not any other reason, just to understand. Because I mean, and I think that's part of the challenge, right? We have employees that we want to reward with increases. So we want to account for that and make sure we've funded that.
Part of what we did, though, when we negotiated the contract to mitigate those issues was the fact that it takes longer to reach the maximum salary now. That period has been elongated. And we also took into account the turnover that takes place in the police department and the cost differentials and the salaries as we've been able to, we appreciate our police force, but as some have retired and others have come on, and that it's a longer duration to get to the top, that has helped smooth the increase as well.
About 5 years, right? Is that about 5 years to get for patrol? For salary, like,
max out, correct.
intro is
It's
5.
But we
Okay.
went from 3 to 5.
Right.
Okay, that's what I thought.
And I do have the capital numbers for this year and for requested for next year. This year was 275,460, and then for this year, requesting 231,498.
So it's a net 40,000 less next year than
Correct.
this year? Okay, thanks. If I could ask that we consider, in structural sense, stay on the incremental cost discussion. Oh, thanks, Gary. The incremental cost discussion so that we can then have a more focused discussion on the millage necessary to absorb that. So Carrie, you mentioned a long list of things you thought we weren't discussing, so we've talked about fire department. What else do you think that should be an incremental cost added into this operating budget for 2022? You have anything else?
So, oh yeah, go on.
So back to the fire company, so they're, on their budget request, they did ask for $318,000 for station renovations for Station A. So we didn't
No,
discuss that.
that's a capital, so it wouldn't be in the consideration of their operating number.
Right, but are we going to discuss that? And
Sure, we can discuss it. I mean, the first place we're looking for that is the American Rescue Plan. We don't have confirmation, but we have indication that the fire company would be eligible for funds under that. And if they were, that would be where we could assign that capital.
And if I can add some clarification, that we are still waiting for final guidance. However, what is clear is that the American Rescue Plan does allow us to replace lost revenue. And from what we're hearing, they're fairly liberal in what they consider lost revenue. So if nothing else, a sizable chunk could be transferred to the general fund as unrestricted as replacing lost revenue, and then you could do what you want with it. The bottom line is, if you wanted to use those funds for the fire department, there's a way to do it.
I'm not sure how we would, though, say that we've lost revenue when I think we're saying our revenue in 2020 was 10.8, and it's going up to 11.4.
no, it would be the fire company's lost revenue. You can,
Just the fire company.
No, it's the municipality. You want to explain?
I went through this it's a GFOA calculation. It includes all funds, not just general fund. So that's
it's a
why the numbers are probably not the same as what you're looking at, because it's all of the funds.
Can you tell me what that number was? A lot that you calculated as a loss?
1.385.
Okay.
And what were the top two determinants at that point?
Well, the way it was calculated was you compare 2019 to 2020, and then there's also history that was done from 2016 through 18. And it's based on growth, the growth rate. We had a really good 2019, which really helped us. So our number for 2019 really brought that growth rate up.
So it was a forward projection, a forward forecast based on historicals.
Yes.
Got it.
And 2019 was when somebody really lucky got a giant bonus that then gave us money. Okay, so it wasn't as a cost we normally.
2019 had a lot of
Two
good
of them,
revenue.
okay. All right.
Goodness, for 2019.
So that's not something that we unfortunately can count on regularly, but it sounds like it's helping us here. Okay.
So coming back to your question, Colleen, I think we want to discuss the request from the fire company with regard to CapEx from that fund, or maybe another fund, perhaps, God forbid, but the fund balance might be an area where we could help them with that, but not in the operating budget number.
I do have a question on that, like, in the absence of the American Rescue Funds for like a 318 capital expenditure, would that typically come out of the general fund, or would that come out of, would it come out of like a capital fund or something?
It would all come out of a capital fund. However, the capital fund doesn't have any millage rate associated with it.
Okay.
So it would have to be funded from a fund which does have a millage rate. Normally, that would flow from the general fund.
Okay.
But you certainly could fund it through the Emergency Services Fund as well.
Okay, so fundamentally, even though it's capital, to us, it's going to be consuming revenue, and it's going to become a expenditure.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
well, and another option for that, if the fire company would want to pursue low-interest loan from the state, they could get the 2% loan for any renovations. And we could, give them the funds to pay for that loan
Over time.
over time. So it's not like we would have to, we could do it either way. We could give them the lump sum, or maybe we explore, they take that low-interest loan. I think it's 2%, right? It's a 2% loan with the fire commissioner?
Or less.
Yeah, I don't know, but certainly if the desire is to finance it, we could certainly look at that option. We could also look at financing it ourselves, which we might be able to get better than a 2%. So if you want to finance it, we certainly could look at that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of paperwork when they go through that, the state fire commissioner office.
That's why I was bringing up, there's far less paperwork if we want to just do it ourselves. I mean, it's not worth issuing a bond, of course, but for a note or something like that, we could definitely explore that. $318,000 is a little bit on the low side for financing, but certainly it's something we could explore.
So then the only other thing I guess that we need to consider is adding a mowing contract then, would be the additional
You said mowing?
mowing contract.
Thank you.
I think the mowing is in there, isn't it?
Yeah, the mowing is already
Oh, okay.
in the Park and Rec proposed budget,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, excellent.
All right, Carrie, you had other things you wanted to discuss about incremental costs, so why don't you go ahead with those lists?
Oh, I thought it was on. Now, fire, stormwater in terms of future. So I believe, we think the ARP will give us some. However, just listening to the EAC, there was, I mean, just the estimate was 2 million in existing pipe improvement. That doesn't count remediating or improving other areas. And I realize that's a long-range thing, but again, is that something we need to consider or at least start building towards because it's something we'll need to address?
Well, and kind of just related to that is, Tim has brought up like the MS4 requirements over time, and so I don't know if that, like I've heard numbers like $4 million over 10 years, you know, I don't know exactly what they are because he's not here, but do we have those types of things accounted for?
No. There is really, the only thing in here in terms of stormwater is just, everyday remediation. There is in the capital fund some gunite projects, which, Joe has recommended we move forward with. I believe there's a little bit of money in the operational budget to address stormwater, but this comes nowhere near funding the stormwater needs of the township.
Have you estimated have you done any preliminary estimation of the cost of the stormwater remediation over the next 10 years or so?
No, I haven't. I would defer to Tim on any of that.
Thank you.
And we had assigned the EAC to do some research and try to give us a round number on that, which we haven't heard back yet, but I think they're going to give us an update in the next meeting, maybe not to this level, but you should get some. We've discussed stormwater down to the point of discussing at length whether we wanted to institute a stormwater fee, and we talked about that conversationally. That's not going to get solved tonight, and it's not part of what we're trying to do here. We do have millions of dollars of stormwater issues, we know that, and they're going to need to get funded through a combination probably of ARP and perhaps new borrowing in future years, but until we know what that number is, discussing the specifics of how we're going to do it is a bit premature. I'd rather stay on the budget needs that we need to resolve in the next few weeks, which include any other incremental costs that are not already in the plan.
One I was going to ask about, kind of related to the stormwater fee you just brought up, Peter, is if we're thinking about a stormwater fee, we had talked about maybe doing a study related to that. Is that something that we want to consider?
We tasked the EAC with investigating that.
Then I thought, and I agree with that, I thought then that post them doing their work to get it together, to formally propose a stormwater fee, we would need to basically take it out to like the proper type of consultant who could do the detailed analysis and give us a defensible approach for that.
Absolutely. As I recall, it's a several-year-long process to get to that point, going through the proper studies and articulating that, taking that to the public and going through that whole process.
So my suggestion was we might want to put, Peter was asking, are there things that aren't in here? If that's a several-year process and we all agree that stormwater is a big issue that's getting worse, do we want to allocate something into the budget to kickstart that project next year?
You certainly could. I don't have a good estimate at my Off the top of my head, I would think in the $20,000 to $30,000 range would be what I was thinking. But everything that both of you just said is absolutely correct. This engineering study has to be done, because whatever fee you charge has to be defensible and in proportion to however you levy the fee.
Right.
And there really is no guidance out there about how to legally do it. There's, to my knowledge, no challenge in the courts yet. The only thing that's out there is it has to be, defensible and justifiable. Some places, there haven't been a lot of places that have done a stormwater fee, but some have done it based on frontage, some have done it based on impervious surface coverage. So there's a few ways to go ahead and do it, but it all starts at the same place with that study.
And we've talked about it, but we're another year in, so if we don't account for it now, that's one more year. Or we decide to just spend the money next year from the reserves, which I guess we could do, correct? Yeah, we could do it from the fund balance.
Yeah, so, and that's a great point. This budget is not for lack of a better term, a death pact. You do have, flexibility next year to go ahead and alter the budget and make amendments, and if necessary, to actually take more money out of the fund balance if needed. So you do have that flexibility.
It feels like a death pact.
Any other incremental costs that you'd like to consider for this budget? Tara?
I'm good, thank you.
I don't have any expenditures, but I did want to ask about our interest earnings and if there's opportunities that we might be missing with that large sum of money that we have, that 4.5 million. If we're only getting interest in the range of $7,000, are there other options that might increase that?
No, the code really limits townships on what they can do with that savings, quote-unquote savings account, to be incredibly risk adverse. There is ways we can go put money in pligot accounts. Do we have some money in? Yeah, so we're pretty much already doing the things that we can. That's another reason why you really don't want your fund balance to get too high, because you're not getting much value out of that money. Under other circumstances, if you want to earn more value, a contribution to the pension funds would be something to consider, where you can get 5%, 6%, 7% per year. However, you don't get it back. It just goes there. So, the short answer is no. There's really nothing else we can do.
Okay, so unless anyone has anything else, the only thing I think we've heard with regard to an incremental cost not already presented is the $186,400 for the fire company. Everyone agree on that? That would be our total deficit, which
$714,112, I believe.
thank you. $714,112. So let's,
That's if you take no mill rate action, and I heard differing things here, so what, if I was going to prepare that in the next draft budget, how would you like to prepare? I could prepare it as a transfer from the general fund over to the emergency services fund, or a mill rate increase, which again is roughly about 0.12 in the emergency services fund.
well, I think that, how we break up the millage into which funds is less of an issue than how much millage we're going to raise in total and what that is as an impact on the taxpayers. That's the first question I would have. $712,000, what's the tax increase going to need to be to make that happen? How we carve that up is of secondary
According to
importance.
Don, it would be about 73 for the average. Last year, when he did the calculation for us, it's 700K. I think he predicted 73 for an average residential assessment of 168.44, which would bring the total payment for your average resident from 351 to 404, roughly. These were last year's numbers, so it might be a little bit different.
And then we had talked about not doing all of that, but finding some balance between use
Space it
of
out.
fund balance and increase in millage so that it's not everything all at once and an extreme burden on homeowners.
And what I thought I heard Peter say, it might have been a different question, was to cover the 714K total, what would that be? And I just did it back of the envelope based on the 186 needs 0.12 mils, probably like 0.44 mils to cover the full 714.
Yes, you came up with pretty much the same thing.
Okay. What was it? Okay, so, sorry. I was off.
Go back to school.
All right, so that's the estimated tax increase to cover all of the incremental cost needs that we have identified. Any other thoughts on how we might mitigate that or how we might soften that blow to the taxpayers?
And I'd recommend putting it into the emergency services fund, since a lot of it is, for emergency services.
I'm not asking about where we're going to put it. I'm asking whether or not there's any thought about reducing the total bill this year to the taxpayers by using some fund balance.
But don't we continue to kick the can down the road, because then we're taking money that can be used for capital projects that we'll need to do, and we'll still end up with kind of the same issue that we've got, which is we're drawing down our general fund. At least that's what I heard. I don't know if that's a correct assessment, but if we adjust it, we still have the same problem. We still have the same structural issues, correct? So next year we increase and do the same thing. It just pushes like I said, sounds like we push the problem down the road. Eventually, someone's going to have to reckon with it. Is that not a correct assessment?
Well, there's some opportunities, though, in 2023's budget that we can reduce the debt service millage and increase the general fund millage to close that gap.
But that then ties our hands for large capital projects that we may want to do, like stormwater, combined fire police station, anything along that line. We've depleted that. We'd have to then maybe raise funds again if we want to do a big project. The other thing is we haven't really planned for those big projects, so it is hard to assess. But just seeing what I've seen, there are large things that as a township, and they're not frivolous things, they're things that just have to be done. So I'm just raising the question because it seems like it's again kind of kicking that can down the road and pulling from reserves.
Well, my thought, one thought I have on that is like, we're projecting a big increase in earned income tax. I mean, the numbers that we have say earned income in the township has gone up. So I don't know what 0.4 mils turns into in terms of the amount out of the pocket of the average homeowner. Is that $100?
I think that's the 73 I was saying. Based on
73?
what, yeah, because Don did the calculation for us last year. And so at an average residential rate, it would be,
25 is $84.
yeah, okay.
So we're talking like 25 cents a day?
Which to somebody that's working, that's probably not that big of a deal. But you have to remember, we have people on the other end of the scale, the income scale, that we want to make sure that
I agree.
they can afford any increases. I'm not in favor of something that would be that high of an increase. I think we could find some kind of solution in the middle where we have plenty of fund balance that we could use. It's not going to take it all away. As we see in this year, we ended up, it was a wash. So we have a lot of variables in this budget with reimbursements from the federal government, the American Rescue money that I'm hoping that in 2022, in the end, maybe we'll be flat or in the positive range with leftover surplus additional.
So you're banking on one-time funding to cover, but again, not addressing the long-term issue over time. Because again, we can do what we did last year, which is the small increase, and be right where we are again with the same discussion that has happened since 2018 or 2017, which is this kind of structural deficit because we don't bring in more revenue than we use. And that's, again, nothing extra. That's not anything fancy. That's not blowing, going out and putting a new park in. That's no preservation of open space. That's my concern again, right? I know, and your average resident pays more for trash than they do for taxes, and that's with the stellar police force and emergency services that people expect. So, I just, again, I think it's irresponsible to not kind of address the bigger issues, or at least start doing it in incremental. Maybe it's not the full 73, but I would say 37 would be irresponsible. And we have no capital fund to speak for. So if we need to do anything with capital, we are kind of stuck.
So we're really, I think we're talking about, for the average taxpayer, are we talking about like maybe $1.60 per week, or can we get that back to $1.20 a week, something like that?
I think there's prudence in splitting the difference here somewhere along the line. It's not responsible to continue to kick it all down the lane, the curb, whatever. But at the same time, we also have a fund balance that's already taxed our residents, so there's merit in returning some of that back into what we're spending and not overtaxing them this year. And then taking the year to really do what Gary and I actually started in 2019 and then got completely derailed by COVID, which is begin to look at revenue streams, begin to look at the
Long-term planning. Yeah.
long-term planning, the retiring of the debt service, begin to pull out the study again that we had looked at with regard, commissioned with regard to the building potentially of a police station. What would that cost? What's our borrowing power with the debt service structure the way it is? Look at, would we really have to borrow all of that? And could some of that millage then be diverted over to the general fund to make that more solvent? So rather than go full in on the increase for this year, split the difference somewhere and spend this year really looking at all of those things and or continue the work that we had started that got derailed along the way.
Well, I think we all agreed earlier in this meeting that post this discussion about the 2022 budget, that there should be a series of meetings and discussions for the longer-term financial future of the township. I think we're all agreed on that, and all of the things you mentioned, Jason, and more would need to be included in that. Stormwater would be part of it, revenue streams, all of those things. So if we can agree that that's a topic for future execution, then we can come back to this discussion. And my view on the fund balance is that the closer you get to what is a reasonable fund balance level, the stronger the argument for not taking from it becomes. But I think we've gone 3 years in a row, including last year when we budgeted some of the fund balance into the budget, and the fund balance continues to get larger. And I have to be the first one to defend having a $2.5 million fund balance to make sure that we are completely covered with respect to A, the bond rating, and B, to any real emergencies. But everything over that is something I feel that we should be spending in some way. And if you don't agree with softening the tax blow to taxpayers who basically already paid those taxes to that fund balance, then there should be other things that would be identified to use that cash. I don't think it's appropriate for the board to leave that money sitting doing nothing, including not getting interest over a long period of time. So I'm looking at about $2 million of excess funds that we don't need to keep in the fund balance for any practical reason. And I would be willing, I would be inclined to do something with respect to softening the increased tax blow by looking at that area.
One point I would like to make, and my analysis might be off, but when I look at if we look at all of the fund balances, not just the general fund, like the general fund looks like it had a big bump in 2019, but I think some of the other balances went down. So I think while we have had some good numbers, overall, it appears that the fund balance has continued to drop generally as a general trend. So I think we are on that trend already. But I agree with you, Peter, that we might want to soften the blow here, and look at it more strategically next year.
And so I think what I heard was we take the fund balance, right? And so in Peter's assessment, money that has been paid in through taxes, and 1.8 million of our $11 million budget is property tax. Roughly 6 million is earned income tax, so the working people of this township, which isn't addressed in millage. So it's really just 1.8, which was, I'm not a math person, what percentage of our budget is that? About 10% of our budget? Everything else is fees and income from working people.
That is a really good point.
So, and again, my point where I'm going with this is it responsible to draw down that 4 million, even though it was paid in, when we have so many other, because if we're drawing that down, that's less money to address stormwater, that's less money to address fire, that's less money to address one-time hits, a downturn in the economy where things go down. So I agree with softening the blow, but again, I just want to make sure we're doing it kind of responsibly with the long-range future health of the township and things that will need to be done. I totally understand, but it's also, we're in this place because it keeps getting pushed down. And I just hate to see it keep getting pushed down.
And it is less than a cup of coffee per week.
So I think at this point, perhaps, Greg, the best thing for us to do is to have you finalize the numbers as we've discussed them tonight, meaning put in the fire amount. And if you don't need to make additional changes to this, as you presented it from what you gave us tonight, just solidify that and give us a financial amount or millage amount that would have to increase for taxes, so that we could then look at that and then have a discussion on how we want to split it.
Okay, I think we actually have that number, right now.
I think he's asking for you to bring it back.
And maybe also a recommendation, if we do take some from the fund, what would you recommend to soften that blow? I mean, I'm open to looking at it. Again, I just worry long-term, we end up in the same situation year over year over year over year over year.
So if I'm hearing correctly, the budget I would bring back to your next meeting would increase the emergency services fund 0.12 mils.
No.
So the emergency services, I'm talking just fire right now. And then the general fund by somewhere in the middle, or give you options, is that what you're asking?
Now, I think I'd like to see the full millage requirement to make up the gap.
Oh, you'll get that,
Okay,
but,
and then, yes, some options with regard to, if you took 150 out, 250 out, 500 out.
okay, so I can give a couple options, 2 or 3 options on that, that's
You
not.
got to
a
allow the
problem.
board to have a more specific discussion and bring us to a vote on a more specific direction.
Okay, and,
I would also recommend, I thought the recommendation, the summary, the executive summary that was provided on the trash, I found that to be very helpful. So I think an executive summary of put it all on one page as opposed to, page after page after page that it gets confusing.
I can summarize the potential mill rate increases and use of fund balance, yes.
I'd say for years in the future, we almost want to have like a one-page income statement balance sheet, type of approach, because this is really hard to dissect. That's what you inherited.
And maybe in a separate memo, Greg, if you would, you were aware of it and suggested, in fact, the financial planning element is what we should, a rough agenda of what should be put together in a series of meetings for the board to consider, and the elements that should be considered that we've already discussed, stormwater and and capital
Absolutely, and
and
if I-
revenue streams as well.
and if I might say, I think that's actually the most important thing that you could be doing. When I look at the decision you made, I mean, I hate saying it this way, but whether you increase the mill rate all the way, or whether you take a proportion, it's, I don't want to say immaterial, but from the future standpoint, the more important thing is you realize, and plan out what it is you're going to be doing, because that, even if you went in and closed that gap and did whatever the mill rate is, you still have to address all the fire needs, you still have to address all the stormwater needs, you still have to address all the other infrastructure needs, and so that plan is going to dwarf, whatever happens in this budget cycle over the next couple of weeks, and I think that's the more important exercise, so I will gladly put together that memo.
And to me, at least, one important element of those discussions is a thorough examination of potential revenue streams, because right now, all we have is property taxes to increase. And while it's a simple math millage increase, you get to a point where if your taxes are high enough, your house prices begin to go down. People want to move out, not in, so you don't want to put the town on a path that does that. And without a change from where we are and having only property tax to look at for additional revenues, and with the recognition that we have payroll costs, benefits costs, pension costs that are going to continue to increase every year, we know that, we're not, then, we're on that path. And we need to find another path is the other piece of that. Okay, anyone else?
I just have one quick question, because that kind of reminded me when you're talking about income. So Greg, you're now removing the golf course lease from the debt service.
Yes.
I know I saw, but which fund are you putting it in now?
Capital.
In the capital?
Yes.
Okay. We originally, I believe, had it in general fund, didn't we? And then when we didn't have enough in debt service, we had switched it over to go into debt service.
Not exactly. What the plan was, or what was approved through the 2021 budget, was a transfer over of debt service funds from debt service over to the general fund. When I got here in discussion with Sue, we recognized that that is not consistent with the second-class township code, and talking with our solicitor, so that never occurred and it's not budgeted for.
No, I'm talking about in previous years.
Oh,
The money that came in for the rent for the golf course went into the general fund. And at that point, we had realized there wasn't enough millage to cover the debt service. So we changed that deposit to go into the debt service, but that.
Yeah, there's no restriction
Let's go
on
to
it. You can
capital.
put it in any fund that you want, and it does kind of make sense to keep it in the debt service fund while you're paying off the financing on it. But now that you've built up a fund balance in the debt service fund, why not let that asset generate some returns that can be reinvested in the township?
Okay.
And tell me again, it goes to the capital?
Yes.
Okay.
Again, it doesn't have to go to capital, but I thought that was the appropriate place for it.
Okay, so unless I hear anything else, that concludes our budget discussion. We'll move on to comments and other business, and I would ask that any comments or other business be refined or restricted to the budget discussions that we're having tonight, or we have another board meeting coming up next week. Are there any comments and other business from the board? Okay, hearing none. Courtesy of the floor, Bill?
We have five attendees at the meeting. No one has raised their hand yet.
I think
One
we
has
need to
just
tell them
raised
they
their
can raise
hand.
Yeah.
Sorry?
One person has just raised their hand.
Okay.
It's Michael Ryan. I'm allowing him to speak.
Can you hear us, Michael?
I can, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, please give us, for the record, your name and your address.
Absolutely. Michael Ryan, 2759 Apple Valley Lane. I just had a couple questions. There was a lot of jumping around from topic to topic this evening, so I'll just list some of my questions, and I'm not sure if there's a question and answer session here, if it can just be discussed at the end. But The rationale for the decrease in the 2022 budget was given early in the meeting, but the rationale for the substantial change in projections for 2021 wasn't. So I was just curious, the last presentation showed a deficit of almost 400,000, and now there's a $234,000 surplus, which might actually be $335,000 surplus. Reason for asking this is if it's a one-time item, it can't be counted on in the future. The structural deficit really does still exist, regardless of the surplus that you're showing. Item number 2, I just want to thank Greg, the interim township manager. It sounds like he has a fantastic business acumen, financial acumen, hit on a lot of good points this evening, especially the point of using the fund balance to cover operating budget gaps will eventually catch up and would result in a large tax increase instead of smoothed out tax increases moving forward. Budget planning and multi-year approach, this has been talked about for years now, and it seems like basically we'll get to it in the beginning of the next year, we'll talk about it, and then you get to these meetings now and nothing's really been done in terms of the long-term financial plan. So hopefully, even though it was addressed again this evening, that'll actually take place in the coming years. I think that will be really helpful because we need a plan. I had asked years ago what the role of the finance committee was in the budgeting process. And I was surprised to hear that the actual answer was none. With 2 different township managers mentioning the need for developing plans, why not rely on the committee that the board took the time to appoint and who would assumingly have finance as their backgrounds to help guide in this process? I think that could help moving forward. And then one final question I had was the capital projects. I think it was mentioned that none of the capital projects in the prior budget workshop presentations were included to be funded in the operating budget at all. I think the total for the capital was $500,000. I think 231 was the police, and then the remainder was from the other different departments. My question would be, I think I heard all as well, unrestricted capital fund has been completely depleted. So where are these capital projects going to be funded from? Obviously, they should be funded from the operating budget, but just curious, if you don't have a capital fund that has money to fund these things, how do they plan on being funded in the future? So thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. Do we have a simple answer to the capital?
Well, there's a number of questions there, and I'll try to go through quickly the ones I remember. First of all, thank you for the kind words. I just will point out that I have a whole team that is working on the budget that, that puts everything together. But I do thank you, for your kind words. As far as the capital budget, everything that I made in the presentation is included. Your point about the unrestricted capital fund being depleted, the funds for anything going forward in the capital fund or capital expenditures is going to have to be a transfer from the general fund or one of the other funds that has a millage rate attached to it, but more than likely would be the general fund. Other questions you mentioned, the overall difference in deficit. The first presentation I gave had the budgeted deficit for 2021, which was approximately $400,000. The numbers we are using right now are projections for 2021. So the $600,000 swing is a combination of lower than anticipated expenditures in certain areas, but 2 big pieces of that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sue, is higher than anticipated earned income tax and higher than anticipated building permits and associated fees. And also real estate transfer tax.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else, Bill? No one else. Okay, hearing no one else.
Let's raise our hand.
So with that, and with thanks to the staff for attending tonight, and in particular, thanks to Sue, who's probably put in more hours on this than the rest of us combined. Thank you all very much for your help in getting this done. We will have the next discussion or the next Board of Supervisors meeting next Thursday, November 4th. Good night. Motion to adjourn.
Motion. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night.